Well, hey guys.
Hey.
So we're going to do something slightly different right now. This is going to be an episode, so that part's not different. But I watched almost the entirety of the Alex Murdaugh trial. Murdaugh, excuse me. And I'm obsessed with it, and I have been, and I still am. And so we thought, since I watched the trial, you don't have time for that. Why don't we go over it?
And I will be learning everything with y'all because I did not watch any of it.
And we've had some people be like, oh, it'd be fun if, like, one of them told the other one a story. And so here you go. We're going to do that here. We're going to see how long it takes us to get through it. I took a lot of notes, I cut out a lot of stuff. Okay, so the trial was a 6 week long trial. I can't tell you
So
everything that
this episode will
happened.
be 6 weeks long.
Yes,
Okay.
without stopping. I have a
Okay.
bucket here
Can
in case I need to relieve myself, and I suggest you do
I
that too.
well, I've got my litter box, so
Perfect. See, because she lacks the strength and the opposable thumbs to flush. Anyway, so yeah, so we'll
just
just go
call me
through
Whiskers.
exactly. So we'll just go through everything and see where we end up here.
And then we'll do that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Um, Also, I don't know if you can see the line on my head, but I just had my massage appointment for the month, and I feel like I've got a line where, so that's why. Um,
There's absolutely nothing there to be
really? Oh,
TBH. I can't see a thing.
oh,
I also do want to point out Terrell and I both had to send each other selfies this morning being like, does our like she was like, does this look okay in my hair? And I was like, yes, oh my gosh, it's so cute. And I was like, okay, do my buns look okay? Because I don't like we're both like,
yeah. We were
is it
scaredy
okay?
cats. Yeah. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh my God, it looks amazing. So,
And I was like, oh my God, you look like that.
oh my God. Yeah. Whew. Okay. So, overview of the case in case you don't know about it. I know you know about it because we did cover this case in two parts last year now.
It was last year, yeah.
I don't remember the episode numbers, but we can link it below. We'll get that linked. But it was in two parts. So obviously at that time, the trial had not started, all that stuff. But if you don't know, on the night of June the 7th, 2021, Alex Murdaugh called 911 to report that he had come home to find his wife and son, and his words were shot badly. His wife Maggie and son Paul were found dead on the family's sprawling property named Moselle. And this thing was like acres on acres on acres, okay? They were found at the kennels on the property, which is about a third a mile away from the main house. They'd both been shot multiple times. Paul was killed with a 12 gauge shotgun, and he sustained two gunshot wounds, one to his head, one to his shoulder. Now, this is gruesome, but it is true. And if you watch any part of the trial, you're going to hear this a bunch of times. Paul's brain was, quote, blown out of the right side of his head, completely severing his brain from his skull. His brain was everywhere. It was awful.
Goodness.
Maggie was shot with a 300 Blackout AR-style rifle 5 times through the left wrist, left thigh, her upper abdomen through the lower back, and a downward trajectory shot to the right back of Maggie's head. Alex Murdaugh has maintained his innocence since the murders, and he stood trial in early 2023. So, like we said, this episode is going to recap the trial and the verdict. Also, y'all, this is off the cuff. This is just us discussing. We're not even bothering our editors with it, okay? If we mess up, we mess up. We're people.
Oh, we're gonna mess up.
Oh, yeah. Just a good old fashioned conversation here. So, the key players in the trial are Judge Clifton Newman. What a precious angel. I love him. Everybody loves him. He's precious.
Okay.
Prosecutor is Creighton Waters.
The names.
Bomb ass. I mean, he did great. Tori, you're not ready for these names. The defense attorneys. The lead defense attorney was none other than Dick Harpootlian. Harpootlian.
Stop it.
Yeah.
I'm
and
sorry.
if you listen to
Bless
the
that little heart.
prosecutors, I know, if you listen to the prosecutors podcast, they call him Pooty Poot. Like they only will call him Pooty Poot. They're like, so then Pooty Poot comes over and says this.
I live for that. Did I ever tell you I was watching a Forensic Files and there was a guy that on there named McCracken. His first name is McCracken, but he goes by Ken. It was like McCracken Floyd.
McCracken
and he goes by
Floyd.
Ken.
Yes. The Kraken. Does he say that every time he goes to the bathroom? Yeah.
Exactly. It's like McCracken.
There's some names out there, man. Harpootlian. And then Jim Griffin is the other defense attorney.
Boring.
I know, it's not as fun. So opening statements, of course. So prosecutor Creighton Waters very succinctly outlines the state's case against Alex Murdaugh and the evidence against him. This includes the fact that Alex, God, see, it's written Alex, and I'm reading it 100 times. Alex, sorry. He pronounced it himself on the stand, though, Alex Murdaugh. But everybody else says Alex or Alex. Alex or Alex.
We watched something, I can't even remember what it was now, when we covered it in the first place, and some people said Alex, and some people said Alec, and some people said Alec, and
it's one of it's the eighth wonder of the world.
No concern for the English language, but at all with that family, because I've talked to so many people who are like, "Are you keeping up with the Murdaugh trial?" And I'm like, "Ooh, ouch, no, it's pronounced Murdaugh, but
whoopsie,
it doesn't make any sense, but it is." So
sure doesn't. No, so there's that. All right, but like we said, the shootings took place at the kennels. Look, okay, I'm gonna talk about this case like y'all know the main points because I have to. Because if we have to go back through everything, it's just going to be way too long. We already spent 2 hours on it before. If you don't know what I mean by saying he's always said he wasn't at the kennels, but now we know he was, then you're not ready for this. Okay, you're gonna have to go back. So I'm just saying that. So anyway, a big part of the state's case is, well, we know he was at the kennels. He said he wasn't. And he says in the opening statement, he'll tell anybody who would listen up until this trial that he was not at the kennels before they died. But he was. And we know that now. That's a big part of the case. And that was just minutes before the shooting occurred. Minutes. And we'll get to a lot of his other elements of his changing story later. Key cell phone evidence will place him there, contradicting all of his statements before trial. Alec did visit his mother, who has Alzheimer's, and you will hear this referred to as Almeda. That's just the name of the property that she lived at. So that night he left Moselle, their property. He went to Almeda to visit his mom's property. He comes back to Moselle. Everything has a name. While there, her caretaker saw him carrying something large and blue. She described it as a tarp or something similar. We find out later it's a rain jacket. He carried it upstairs, and she sees him do some other stuff on the property that was kind of weird. He went out to the back of the property where there's like a smokehouse, but it was weird. Kind of weird that he came even that late at night, all this stuff. The law enforcement will later find that rain jacket, and the inside of it is completely coated in gunshot residue. That's going to be part of their case too. They also found gunshot residue on Alex Murdaugh at the scene, as well as on his seatbelt inside his vehicle. Creighton Waters is going to talk about how close the kennels are to the main house. And you're like, if you watch the trial, you see a lot of like overhead shots of the property, so that you can understand where everything is in relation to each other. But he talks about how if you're standing in the main house and you look out, you see the kennels. If you're standing at the kennels and you can see the main house, they're close together. Couple minute walk. If you go down, a minute in a vehicle, not that far. So one would think that, how many shots did we say? 7 shots at least. That's the ones that hit. And he doesn't hear any of this. And he's in the house. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Ain't no way.
Mm-mm.
I'll tell you what, because I live out in the country, and if I've heard people, it's, I don't know when hunting seasons are, but the other day, I think it was Sunday, I was sitting out on my porch and I heard a bunch of gunshots and they were far. And I heard them because I have ears and I can hear them.
Right.
It's not like it was a minute away, or you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, exactly. There are also 2 driveways on Moselle, one that they both lead to the main house, but there's one over here, and then there's one that goes up past the kennels. The mailbox is actually at the end of this driveway. This is the driveway they took most of the time. So when Alec is telling police that he drove by but never saw them before he left, presumably they're already dead. This also doesn't make any sense. Or why did he not just stop and say, hey, I'm going to visit my mom now. Do you want to come with me or whatever? So that's kind of part of it. Ballistics reports confirm that the blackout rounds that killed Maggie matched blackout rounds that they found on the property. And this was from weeks before when Paul and his friend were shooting the 300 blackout for fun. They were just out there shooting. And the friend tells them, this is where we shot. And it was however many couple weeks ago or whatever. They go out there, they find the rounds from that, and it matches the rounds from the murder scene. So it would appear that Maggie was shot with a family weapon. At the very least, ammunition that the family already owned. So the kind of main timeline that we have here is, and they get a lot of this from the cell phone evidence, which Alec, as a prosecutor, forgot completely that it existed whatsoever. Like, I don't know why he did not. And even he says sometimes in some of his interviews with law enforcement, well, I think you could get my phone and find that out. Surely when y'all get my phone, you'll find that out. Like, oh, so you do know they can get information from phones. Right. But Maggie gets to Moselle that night about 8:15 p.m. Paul is already there. The family eats dinner together. At 8:30 p.m., Paul's phone moves toward the kennels. During this time, Alec originally claimed he was napping on the main house couch. Don't ask him any fucking questions. He was asleep. He don't know anything. 8:44 p.m., Paul records a video on his cell phone. So, if you watch the trial, you know that Paul was keeping his friend Rogan Gibson's dog that week. I'm not sure for how many days or whatever, but he was keeping the dog. And they have a billion kennels. They've got room for this dog, right? There was something wrong with this dog's tail. I think this dog's name was Cash. So, Paul was trying to figure out what was going on with the tail. He's on the phone with Rogan. Alec calls him Ro-Ro.
I don't like that.
He also exclusively refers to Maggie as Mags and Paul as Pawpaw during his testimony. And I really, I was like, okay, Mags. And then he was like, and Pawpaw. And he only called him Pawpaw. And then he said, yep. Because finally Creighton Waters is like, okay, I hear you calling them Mags and Pawpaw. And it was like, because everybody was noticing it. Like, if you were like watching it live, the comments were like, what is Pawpaw? Where is this coming from? Like, I've never heard him say this before. And Creighton Waters was just like, I can't. So he's like, I've never heard you refer to Paul as Pawpaw in any interview you've ever given. I've never seen anything. Like, you've never called him that before, but during your testimony, that's what you're calling him. And he's like, oh, excuse me. If you prefer me to call him Paul, I'll call him Paul. He's like, no, you can call him whatever you want to. I'm just confused because I've never heard you say this before. And he's like, did other people call him that too? He's like, oh yeah, Bus called him Pawpaw, Mags called him Pawpaw, Ro-Ro called him Pawpaw. And I was like, I'm formally declared deceased at this point. Like, so anyway, Ro-Ro is Rogan Gibson. So Rogan was friends with Paul and I guess Buster too, but he was on the phone with Paul that night. trying to figure out what's going on with the tail. He tried to FaceTime Rogan, and for whatever reason, either Rogan couldn't see or it wasn't going through right or whatever. Apparently, they have spotty service out there. I wouldn't know anything about that. FaceTime wasn't working. So, unbeknownst to Alec, Paul takes a video on his phone to send to Rogan. And Alec doesn't know this video has been taken. In the background of the video, you can hear his voice. And over a dozen family members and friends on the stand listen to that tape and say, yes, that's definitively with 100% certainty, that's Alec's voice. So now we know he's at the kennels, but leading up to the trial, he never admits to that because he doesn't know about this video. So that's at 8:44 p.m. 8:49 p.m., Paul's phone locks for the last time and it never unlocks again. After this, he doesn't respond to any phone calls. He never sends another text. He never makes another call, none of that. And friends and family actually ended up testifying to how much this family used their cell phones. We use our cell phones all the time too. Even though I don't have service in my house, 99% of the time it's in my pocket with me. I still got it, but they're like that. Alec is no different. He's always on his phone too, and that's going to come into play in a little bit. But basically, if Paul was able to be on his phone, he would be on his phone. And in fact, at this time, I think his phone was down to less than 2% battery, and he's still on Snapchat. He is still texting. He don't give a fuck. He's using his phone, right? It's whatever, I'll figure that out later. Maggie's cell phone also locks at 8:49 p.m. for the final time. So you can surmise, and the state does surmise, that they were shot around 8:49 p.m. or shortly thereafter, because there's nothing
activity.
Ever happens again after that. Yeah. Alec's phone is turned off from 8:09 p.m. to 9:02 p.m., or at the very least, there's absolutely no activity during that time. No activity, no phone calls, no moving around, no lock or unlock.
Well, yeah, that's because of the sleeping. It's the napping.
Oh, shit, I forgot the napping. Okay.
It was the napping.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. At 9:04 p.m., he calls Maggie. He calls his father, who is in the hospital that day, by the way. His dad went into the hospital that day, and he died a couple days later. He was in a bad way. He had lung cancer, I believe, and he had taken a turn for the worse. And there was all this going around with their family that day about, okay, we need to go, somebody check on mom because dad's in the hospital, and all this stuff. At night, he calls her again at 9:06 because obviously she's not answering. So, and that's another, you can also surmise that her phone locked at 8:49. It never unlocks again. He starts calling her at 9:04 and she's not answering. Now, she's right over there, but he will call her and text her, but he never goes to the kennels and is like, hey, I'm trying to get a hold of you to tell you I'm going to my mom's. Do you want to come with me? He doesn't do that. He just GTFO. So he calls her, then he texts her. He says, I'll be right back, going to Alameda. Then Alec drives to Alameda to go visit his mom. He stays there about 20 minutes. He makes about 1 billion phone calls during that time, to and from. He calls Rogan alone 5 times during this time. I'm sorry, not during this time. He calls Rogan 5 times that night, not necessarily at this moment. Because they're just good friends and they know each other, and he's like a son to him. Why wouldn't he call him?
Okay.
But he knew because he was at the kennels, but he doesn't know that we know that he was at the kennels, but he knows that if Rogan and Paul were on the phone, then he might have heard him down there. And he's telling people he wasn't down there, so it makes sense that he would call Rogan. He says, nothing out of the ordinary there. He drives over 80 miles an hour to Alameda and back, which he tries to say on the stand, old country roads, that's just what you do. And I'm like, I get that to a point. I've driven 70 miles an hour down the roads out where
65, 70. Yeah.
80 is a lot. And he's trying to close this time gap, right? Anyway, so he then tells the police once this tragedy occurs, this got to have something to do with the boat case. And again, if you don't know about the boat case, you want to go back and listen or watch something or whatever, but the boat case is a big deal. So then we have lead defense attorney Dick Harpootlian's opening statements. He talks about how honored he is.
Not going to be funny.
I know. He talks about how honored he and his team are to represent Alex Murdaugh. He says the prosecutor is laying out theories. He has no facts to back any of this stuff up. He actually has Alex stand up and be like, do you see this man? This is a loving father and a loving husband. And you're not going to find anybody to testify that his relationship with them was anything other than loving. There were no problems. A loving family man. Their whole strategy appeared to be, does this guy look like a killer? No. Does somebody who provides for their family, and he even uses the term yucking it up with Paul because there's a Snapchat video that they take earlier in the night and they're laughing and having fun together. Could somebody who's yucking it up with Paul at 7:15 p.m. turn around an hour and a half later and kill him? Of course not.
Yeah. And also that makes complete sense why he would just all of a sudden throw on some nicknames to make it seem like they were just super, super close. And
exactly.
Look at what a great relationship we have. I only call him Pawpaw.
And it was, I think that he thought it was going to look really good for him, and man, did it backfire, because again, he'd never said it any other time. So it's just weird.
Now, if he called his dad, if the kids called him Pawpaw, that makes sense to me, because a lot of grandfathers are called Pawpaw. But
right,
that's rough stuff.
And some of the family members did testify that apparently Paul had a lot of nicknames and Pawpaw was one of them, but nobody referred to him as that. It's not like I feel like everybody has an uncle who somehow just goes by Bubba, no matter what his damn name is. It's just Bubba, That's one thing. But Paul didn't go by it. He pulled it out just during, if I was going to get up and testify about Ben, my son, I wouldn't be like, well, and then Benny Boo said this, and then Benny Boo did that, and then Benny Boo said this. I call Ben Benny Boo from time to time. Just like, hey, what do you want to drink, Benny Boo? Whatever. It's just like a silly little thing. But I certainly wouldn't get on the stand and refer to him exclusively as that.
Yeah,
it's just very
I call
strange.
You T-Rex, and in my phone, you are T-Rex, but I wouldn't, I don't refer to you as that when I'm talking to other people about you, which I talk about you a lot, and not good.
I would flip you off if I could, but I feel like that's in poor taste right now. It's just, they wanted the jury to be like, I just can't get there. I can't see that he would murder his family in such a horrific way. And so that's really what they're trying to get at. He alleges there's absolutely no motive, no reason that Alec would kill his family. Again, how could someone in the span of 1 hour go from happy and laughing to psychotic wife and son killer? He alleges that the cell phone records are simply incomplete, so why trust them? Is what he's getting at with that, I believe. They're gonna and they have to poke holes in the investigation, right? They have to say things that are like, well, none of this makes sense. They didn't take this one, fingerprint, or they didn't take this one photo, or why didn't they do this, or why didn't they do that? They're going to have to do some of those. He says Alex should be covered in GSR, gunshot residue, if he's the person that shot him, but he has little bits of it on his clothes. Well, that Snapchat video that we talked about where he and Paul were yucking it up, looking at some tree or whatever, he's wearing a completely different outfit in that video than he wears when the police get there after he calls 911. But the defense is like, well, he didn't hardly have any gunshot residue on him, so that doesn't make any sense. It's like, okay, and he also wasn't wearing the clothes that he was wearing earlier, so yeah, you just deleted that point from your point thing. Point bucket. Point, I don't know. He also
Scoreboard.
says, thank you. He also says, and this really was like, Pooty Poot brought his audacity to court with him today because he said in his opening statement, okay, so maybe Alec was at the kennels before they were murdered. That didn't even matter. What does it matter? It had nothing to do with it. Just because he was there doesn't mean he's the one that killed him. Technically, no, it doesn't, but it absolutely does matter because he's lied about it this whole time. What, like, that means everything else he's told us is not true. So, because you can't have the story you told and that be all around that I never went to the kennels, but I did go to the kennels, but all that other stuff is still true. Like, that doesn't make, oh my gosh. They try to have this overarching theme that law enforcement had tunnel vision on Alex Murdaugh. They never entertained any other suspect, and that's all there is to it. That's what this is. This is a railroad type case. He also brings up that no bloody clothes were found. He said Alex could not have done all the things he needed to do, commit the murders, clean up the scene, change clothes, all that before he left to visit his mother. He at the end is like, and they're just telling you stuff that's not true. Take, for example, the rain jacket. I talked to the caretaker, and when I showed her the picture of the rain jacket they found, she said, well, that's not what I saw. That's not what I told them I saw. And the prosecutor is like, objection, like, what the fuck? You can't do that. And the judge was like, yeah, don't do that. Like, sustain, don't do that. And then he was like, well, that's pretty much all I had to say anyway, basically. And he was finished. So it just, Harpootly and something else. So we, obviously, prosecution's case goes first. They play the full 911 call. I almost said 911 call.
That's literally 3 numbers.
Yeah, and that was tough for me. One thing that a lot of people have talked about online is when the dispatcher is like, okay, because he's given the address and everything, and she's like, is it a trailer or a house? And he's like, ah! It's like, ew, how dare you ask me that? Yeah, I have a sprawling property, ma'am. Like,
it's got a name.
Exactly. It has a name. He tells them that he's already checked for a pulse. He's already tried to roll them over because she says, don't touch anything. You don't want to mess anything up. He's like, I've already touched stuff, all that stuff. And it's in this call that Alec first mentions the boat case and that it has something to do with the boat case, that they were being targeted because of the boat case. One thing that every single first responder officer on the scene testifies to is that Alec was clean when they got there. He was wearing a white shirt. It had no blood on it. He had no blood on his hands. He had nothing on him anywhere. And this was a brutal, brutal scene. There was nothing on his shirt, his pants, his shoes, nothing. Presumably, if you were to get down and check their pulse and things or try to hug them or render aid in some way, you would think you would find some blood or something, but there was nothing there. Alec also says that at one point when he's trying to turn Paul over to check his pulse, that his phone just pops out of his pocket. Which seems a little
like
strange.
A Jack in the Box?
Basically, yes.
Yeah.
And if you listen to these interviews, the first several interviews over the first couple weeks of the investigation, you can hear that like Detective David Owens is being SLED agent, is being very delicate with him. This completely contradicts the defense's statement of they were aggressive with him. They were beating him up, like really, really coming at him, and they were just bulldogs with him and all that stuff. They're very like, I'm really sorry I have to ask you this, like, but I have to ask you this. And he's like, I understand, gotta do your job, like whatever. But he says in the interview, the very first interview, His family was at the kennels. He was at the house. He never, ever, ever went to the kennels. And I also want to note that Alex sounds very convincing here to me. If you look at any of the interviews with him, he does that thing where he's very endearing. He'll give you a little more information. He'll kind of lighten it up a little bit. I would believe every damn word he said to me. I'm positive of it. He's good at convincing you what he's trying to tell you. He describes his relationship with Maggie and Paul as absolutely wonderful. He starts talking about, all the threats that Paul had been receiving as a result of the boat case. And then they said, what kind of threats? And he's like, I don't really know any specifics. And they're like, well,
how would you not know specifics about threats?
And he's like, I don't know, just like maybe some stuff on social media or something. They didn't tell me exactly what was said, but I kind of knew it was happening. Like sometimes Paul would go out and he'd just come back with a black eye and he'd say somebody just walked up and punched him because of the boat case. And one analysis that I listened to of this interview said, okay, so the Murdaughs are arguably the most litigious family in all of the land. And you mean to tell me that Paul in this small town, where everybody knows everybody, somebody walked up and punched him in the damn eye and y'all didn't sue them or report it to police?
Right.
So I don't know.
No way.
Okay, then he tells the police that the groundskeeper had told Paul that he worked with the Navy SEALs undercover to kill Black Panthers. No, he didn't. No, he didn't tell you that. But he was very obviously trying to, he's been found guilty, so presumably he's the person that's done it. He's trying to send them in every direction he can. He goes back through that timeline of the day and includes that 25 to 30-minute nap after dinner before his visit to his mom, laying his ass on the couch, not going anywhere. In another interview a day or so later, he has trouble recalling the events of the day. So they ask him, walk us through that whole day. And he's like, oh, it was a regular day. Started out like every other day, right? Just regular old, same old, regular ass stuff. What time did you get to work? Can't remember. What time did you come home? Can't remember. Who was at the house when you left for work? I don't know. I assume Maggie was. I don't know if Blanca had got there yet. She's their housekeeper. He can't tell you anything about it. What time he went to work, what time he came home, like none of that. It's very strange. It was also so not a regular day at work for him, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but it is astounding that he's just like, I don't know, regular work day. I don't know. So he did say that he thought he left the office earlier than normal that day. Again, he cannot remember what time, but Paul was supposed to be coming home that evening, and so he wanted to be there with him. Alec and Paul ride around the property, like checking on the property. They're also supposedly looking for hogs. I've learned so much about hogs in the Low Country. They are a ding-dang pest over there. They will
like
eat all
hogs,
your shit.
Right?
Yeah.
Not the John Travolta, Tim Allen, not that variety.
No. Yeah, wild hogs. Yeah. Okay. They will just fuck your shit right up. So they would often ride around and look for hogs. Apparently they're nocturnal, so most of the time when you shoot them, you would usually shoot them at night. But you can go around in the daytime and look for signs of them. Do I see that they've been active? And then now I need to get out and kill some damn hogs.
Well, and then I love to watch just all of the garbage and trash. And Southern Comfort is a liquor. Southern Charm. They go on a hog hunt in South Carolina at one point.
Yep. Like there's
have
no
dogs
like
with them, and they
yes, there's apparently not necessarily like a hunting season for them. It's just they are such a pest to the area, to wildlife and everything, that if you see one, you can shoot it. It's not a big deal. So that's supposedly what they're doing. Yeah, that's what they're doing around this time, is they're looking for signs of hogs. They're checking on other stuff around the property, and they're having a good time. He says They might have rode for 20 minutes. They might have rode for an hour. How the fuck is he supposed to know that? Then they go back to the house to have dinner. This is about 8:15. He tells them that Paul had been having high blood pressure lately. His feet had been swelling. Maggie was really worried about him because they said, "What did y'all talk about at dinner?" I don't know. I don't know what we talked about at dinner. But I do know that Maggie was worried about Paul because of his blood pressure. I assume we may have spoken about that. I don't know. Then after dinner, they're like, okay, what happened after dinner? He's like, well, Paul disappeared. I don't know where the fuck he went. He's just gone. But Maggie went to the kennels. Paul did go to the kennels, but Alec tries to just say here, he doesn't even know where he went. He doesn't know what he did. Just no idea. Like Paul just sort of was like that Family Guy thing where he sort of like backed into the bush and then was just like just gone. Like we I don't know what happened to him.
Slipped through a seam in the wall.
He's just gone. And he didn't want to go to the kennels, so he didn't go. He says Maggie went. They said, did Maggie walk or drive? I wish I could tell you. I don't know. I don't know what she did. She normally would have driven, but I don't know. Then he says he stays at the house. He farts around on his phone, falls asleep on the couch. And then they're like, well, what time did you wake up? He's like, oh, I don't remember what time I woke up, but you can check my phone when you get it and find out what time I woke up and probably and all that stuff. And it's like, so they're going to get your phone. You know that. Like, okay. He does say at one point that he thought he heard a vehicle pull up. He thought Paul and Maggie were back, but it wasn't. Or maybe it was a cat that was wild on their property. Something like that.
I've heard cats and I've heard cars. They don't, to me, sound the same. They
don't sound the same. Now, on the stand, when he testifies, he will say that he never told law enforcement that he heard a car pull up. And they're like, but you did. You said, I thought I heard Paul and Maggie coming back, like pulling up in the driveway. And he's like, but I didn't say I heard a car. And they're like, okay. And they're like, well, what about this cat? And he's like, well, that's not what I said either. What I said was there was a cat who had gone wild on the property and sometimes be at the house and sometimes he'd be over here and sometimes he'd be over there and sometimes you walk out and you won't even see him. So I thought I had seen him around at some time. And so I was just telling them that, because he's trying to be forthcoming and giving them all the information. So he tells them about the fucking alley cat out in the yard, but he doesn't tell him he was
barn cat.
Yeah, but he doesn't tell him he was at the kennels that night.
This reminds me so much of on Dairy Girls, Uncle Colum giving the... Do you remember the time where he got tied up? He was like abducted, kind of. He was tied up at his... And he goes on TV to explain his story, and it's like 45 minutes long.
It takes
he's telling
forever.
everything.
Dude,
everything.
That's Alec on the stand. And just wait till we get to him. I can't even. So, one thing we learn in some of these early interviews is that Paul... Okay, you know how sometimes like you leave stuff laying around, like not you specifically, anybody. Like, oh, I might forget. Okay, because I always make my own drinks in these Starbucks cups. This is a protein drink right now. But I carry these bitches with me everywhere because now I like to drink everything out of these cups. And so I'll bring them with me. And so like we went to a birthday party for somebody and I brought my own damn drink with me and I accidentally left that there. Okay. Paul's Starbucks cup that he would leave everywhere was guns. He would accidentally forget his guns everywhere. And some of these were very expensive guns. So specifically this .300 Blackout rifle. Paul had already lost one in like 2017. This is a $2,600 gun, $2,800 gun, something like that. He just lost it. So they later bought another one and now it's missing again.
Tell me you are absurdly wealthy without any appreciation for money without telling me.
Exactly. And it was kind of funny too, because when Alec was on the stand talking about Maggie and how he was just talking about her and he's like, oh, Maggie, she loved to go visit people. And, and because he said that she had that Find Your Friends app on her phone or whatever, which is that a real thing? I didn't know about that. But anyway, she'd be out in town or whatever, and she'd check her little app, and she'd see that one of her friends was maybe at the Walmart or whatever. And so I thought he was going to be like, and then she'd be like, she'd just stop by and see him at the Walmart or whatever. He's like, so she'd
where that's
see.
headed.
No, it's not. So she'd see that her friend was at Walmart, and she'd text him, be like, hey, while you're at Walmart, pick me up a TV or something or whatever. And I was like, a TV? Like, again, these are absurdly wealthy people. If I know you're going to Walmart, I might ask you to pick me up some damn Q-tips.
Yeah.
The thing that came to his mind was, yeah, TV. Would you pick me up a TV, please? Like, I was like, oh my
on your way
gosh.
home, can you stop by and get me a car? Like, that's insane.
Exactly. So again, and he's going to argue with Creighton Waters when he's on the stand that he didn't live a wealthy lifestyle, but just hold on to that. But so we find out Paul leaves guns everywhere. The defense is going to use this to essentially victim blame Paul, that these murderers who targeted him because the boat case drove up to the property, and just so happened, maybe they knew Paul already, and they knew he left guns everywhere, and they knew that guns would be there to kill him with. And perhaps Maggie was collateral damage or something. But that's where they take that. But the SLED agent during this interview says, I know that you saw a traumatic image that night and it was really difficult for you and like all of these things. And talking about it today must be really hard for you. And Alec responds, I did. It's just so bad. What people think he said was, it's just so bad. I did him so bad. So there's like all these camps of people that either say, it's so bad, I did him so bad, or it's so bad, they did him so bad. And people viewed this during the trial, leading up to the trial, as this like confession during the SLED interview where he says, I did him so bad and it was a Freudian slip and it just came out and whatever. May
I ask, what did you hear, one or the other? Or are you unsure?
I hear him say, it's just so bad. I did. It's so bad. Because remember, the question he was just asked, or the statement was, I know you saw a traumatic picture that night, and this is hard for you to talk about. It's just so bad. I did.
So it's like a broken sentence.
Picture. Yeah. It's so bad. That's what I heard. And I watched, because again, I watched this whole trial live. And so like when they took recesses, like I was still watching that shit because they had analysts come on and they're talking about it. And the state really put a lot of weight on this part. I did him so bad. They asked several law enforcement agents, what do you hear in this? And the woman, the analyst that was talking about it, was like, well, if he's saying, presumably answering what he just said, and he says, you saw a traumatic picture. Yes, I did see that picture. Yes, it was bad. Like, because the defense comes on and says, okay, you're saying that this was kind of a confession. Did you ask him any follow-up questions after that? No. Did you write it down? No. Did you ask him anything about it later? No. So then it wasn't a confession, because you would have jumped on that or you would have done something with that. And there wasn't even a physical note in the file. The guy said, well, I made a mental note of it.
A mental note? Stop it. Well, and it sounds like they were trying, or they were thinking they had this like, oh my God, like bada bing, this is the moment, like in The Jinx when he's in the bathroom and he's like, I killed them all. I did it.
Yeah. And to me, he's responding to what they said. I think he did it, but I don't think that he confessed to it right there.
Right.
Yeah. Alec deleted his call log from a certain time on June 4th, 1921. Jesus. What am I, an olden lady?
An old case.
Yeah. 2021 through June 7th until like 10 o'clock p.m. 2021. So that's kind of weird. We hear from Paul's friend who testified to, remember they had shot that Blackout rifle a couple weeks before.
Is this Roro, or this is a different friend?
Different kid. Yeah. Roro didn't shoot the gun with him that week.
Okay.
So this friend says, yeah, we shot, the blackout there. That's exactly where they found the matching bullets or casings or whatever that killed Maggie. He did, on cross-examination, the defense did get him to admit, because Alec is trying to say that gun went missing after that. So it couldn't have been used in the shooting, or that somebody had stolen it, but that it wasn't on the property after that. So defense did get him to admit, well, did you see it? That blackout rifle any day after the day that you shot it on the property? He's like, well, no, I didn't see it again after that. It's like, see, it could have gone missing. So whatever. The caretaker of Alec's mom, her name is Shelly. She testified about that blue tarp, which we now know is a rain jacket. She says that Alex stayed at the house visiting for 20 minutes that night. But that later he came to her and said, hey, you remember when I was here the other night visiting mom? I was here for 45 minutes. Remember that? And she's like,
45 minutes.
She knew he'd only been there for 20 minutes and she felt very uncomfortable about it. And then he said, which he's never brought this up to her before, aren't you getting married soon? She's like, yeah. He's like, weddings are expensive, aren't they? She's like, yeah. He's like, well, I'd be happy to help you with that. And you work for the school system, don't you? Yeah. Well, I got a lot of connections with the school system. I could get you a better job with them if you wanted me to. So that doesn't look good. And this woman was so emotional about giving this testimony. And she said they were a good family. I loved working for them. They were good people. She was heartbroken to have to say that, but it was the truth. And it was very difficult for her. It was sad. So Judge Newman ends up allowing testimony about Alec's financial crimes, because we know that he'd been stealing money from everybody forever, essentially. Yes. The defense did not want to allow that in. They thought that would be too prejudicial. The state alleges that this is a big part of his motive, because he was, at this time, the pressure cooker of all the financial crimes, the boat case, everything was about to explode. Plus, his dad went into the hospital that day. Randolph was the guy who got Alec out of everything. When Alec was going around taking out $500,000, $600,000 loans from all the banks around to cover money that he'd stolen from somewhere to try to put it back in, every time his law firm was getting close to figuring something out, he'd go get another loan. Randolph co-signed that for him. Randolph gave him money. Randolph got him out of everything. Well, his dad went to the hospital that day and then he died. And they knew it wasn't good when he went in the hospital that day. So his fixer, his
get out of jail free card
is gone. That's a big deal. The other thing that happens, and the former PMPED CFO, Jeannie Seckinger, testifies for the state, and she tells us, because remember in the opening statement, Harpootlian is all, why this day? Why June 7th, 2021? What does that day have to do with anything? Why, how could he be happy one minute and then killing his family the next? Don't make no sense. Well, here's why. Because that day, June 7th, 2021, she confronted Alec in the hallway as he leaned on a water cooler or a water fountain or whatever outside of his office, that $792,000 in fees were missing. And where the fuck did they go?
Did you say $792?
Thousand.
Okay. I think
I may have
my heart stopped when you said no. I think you said it right, but I was like, surely to God, it's not $792,000.
And that was a small amount that he stole. Many of these settlements were. I mean, he stole from the Satterfields $4.3 million. I think it was like.
I knew he stole a lot of money, but that's just an
millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars. So she says, hey, we can't find that money. Where is it? And he kept saying, oh, it's just the record of it's missing. I'll find it. We'll get it cleared up, like whatever. But she said that day he had already told her that before. I'll get it to you, whatever. Well, she came back to him that day to ask him about it, and she knew something wasn't right because he wasn't giving it to her. But literally, as they were speaking about it, he gets a call finds out his dad is in the hospital and that he's not doing well. And so he leaves. He says, my dad's in the hospital. I've got to go. This is really bad. We'll talk about this later. Okay, so what? But in every interview he's ever had, he talks about June 7th, 2021, like it was a run-of-the-mill fucking day. But that was the day that his law firm said, you have stolen money and we know it. And now we are going to go back and look at your other cases. It was all about to be undone. Plus, there was a hearing coming up. So Mark Tinsley is the next person to testify. He's the attorney for Mallory Beach's family. Mallory is the one who passed away in the boat case, and some of the other families. But they had a hearing June 10th, just a couple days later. And it was the financial hearing for the boat case. And this was where his financial records were going to be subpoenaed if he didn't share the books, because he was trying to tell Mark Tinsley and the Beach family that he was dead fucking broke and he didn't have any money to give them in this settlement. And so he was going to have he was going to have to produce that information only 3 days later. But guess what happens if Maggie and Paul die? That case goes away.
Life insurance.
And, well, okay, so I didn't know this, but Mark talked about sympathy, and the state brought up the word sympathy as part of their motive. But what Mark Tinsley says, essentially, once the murders happened, the community then would have felt that Alec was another victim of this, right? Because he's lost his family and everything, and it would look bad in court to go after him for millions of dollars when he's just lost his son and wife. And he said no jury in this area is going to award money from him when that has just happened. So for him, that case goes away, because he said, I would have had to remove remove Alec from the defendant list, because there were others that were on there, but he would have had to take him off. So that's a big deal. That's a motive. That's absolutely a motive. And the defense tries 100%. To act like that has nothing to do with anything. Marion Proctor, which is Maggie's sister, testified that after the murders, Alec's main priority was to clear Paul's name in the boat case. He never once mentioned finding the person that killed them, and she thought that was strange. The defense got her to concede that wasn't it very important to Maggie to clear Paul's name, because Maggie also did not believe that Paul was driving the boat, and she said, well, yes, but I just thought, because you would think, especially if the family is being targeted, you would think that Alec and Buster are afraid for their well-being. She said, I was afraid something was going to happen to them, because if somebody's targeting the family, especially since it wasn't just Paul that was killed. If it was just Paul that was killed, you could think, okay, vigilante justice, whatever. But what about Maggie? She wasn't there when it happened. So she thought that was strange. And then she said, she gets very emotional about this, but Maggie was not supposed to be at Moselle that night. She had been staying at their beach house in, I think, Edisto, I think is the name of the town or something. They had a beach house. She'd been staying there. There are rumors that I've heard, we talked about this when we covered it, that she had possibly seen a divorce lawyer. She was possibly going to leave him. Like, there was some other stuff going on. That doesn't necessarily come up in the trial, so I don't know all that to be true, but I do know that she'd been staying at the beach house, and she wasn't going to go to Moselle that night, except that Alec told her he needed her there because his dad had gone to the hospital and his mom was real upset, and she always liked to go see his mom at Alameda, so he wanted her to come with him to go to Alameda. But remember, he never asks her to go. Exactly.
Yeah. And so she go that late at night? Like, that doesn't make any kind of damn sense.
It's 9-something. This woman has Alzheimer's, and supposedly she wasn't even awake when he was there. She was asleep the whole time. Yeah. So Maggie calls Marion and tells her all this, and Marion says, you should go and be with your husband. He needs you. You should go. And she is very emotional about that.
She's beating herself up about it.
Blames herself for encouraging her to go. It's so sad. But what's funny is she says, so on cross-examination, Jim Griffin is the one doing the cross in this one. And he gets her, he's like opening up this line of questioning that's like, you know, well, you thought the murders had to do with the boat case too, didn't you? And she's like, well, I did up until September. And so Creighton Waters is like, ha ha. And so on redirect, he's like, what happened in September? Because they weren't going to let the roadside shooting come in at all. But she brought it up. So he said, well, what happened in September to change your mind about that? She starts talking, and what she says is, well, in September, my husband and I were on the way to a football game, and we got a phone call, and we found out that Alec had been shot, and we were freaking out about it. And she's like, I thought, that's it. They're going after every person in the family. Like, Buster's going to be next. She was freaking out. So she said, we talked to Buster. Buster said, yeah, he's been shot. He's being life flighted to the to the hospital. We think he's going to be okay.
Kind of redundant. Flying to the airport, and then he's going to fly over to the hospital.
You have to stop at the airport first. Everybody knows that. And then Jim Griffin actually called her, or she called Jim Griffin. Anyway, but this attorney, because he's a family friend. He was Paul's attorney in the boat case before Paul died. So she talks to Jim Griffin on the phone, and she's like, and Jim said, and Jim Griffin jumps up and he's like, objection, hersay. And like everybody busts out laughing because it's him saying it. And the judge is like, well, that puts you in a pickle, doesn't it? And he's like, are you going to be a witness now? Like, what are we doing here? Like, got a little close for comfort, haven't you? So they make the jury leave. She tells the whole story. Judge Newman ultimately allows it in. And she says, you know, that's the day that we found out that he'd been fired for stealing all this money. And we didn't know that before. So, this is also where we learned that Paul's nickname in the family was Little Detective, in addition to Pawpaw, apparently. She never mentions Pawpaw. She only says Little Detective, and we've not heard Pawpaw before this. But anyway, she says that Paul was, he was very intuitive. He paid attention to stuff. He knew that his dad would have pills on him in the house. He made it his mission to find them and try to keep Alec off of them, essentially. So if he knew they were in the house, he would find them. He'd tell Maggie. He was piecing things together. He also had been out a few times in the weeks before that, and the credit cards that he had on him were getting declined.
Paul was?
Uh-huh.
Little detective? Okay.
And he probably was asking questions. I don't know that. But was he asking questions like, why are the credit cards getting declined all the time? Because he's the only one that handled the money. Maggie didn't do that. Paul didn't get into it. It was all Alec that did the money. And now credit cards are getting declined. There's something going on, right? But they called him Little Detective. Blanca, the Murdaugh family housekeeper, testified. She, the main part of her testimony was about their laundry, and the reason that's important is because of the outfit change that Alec did the night of the murders. So when they got to him, he was wearing a short sleeve shirt and I believe shorts. It was like a white short sleeve shirt, but in the Snapchat video, he's wearing like a Columbia looking like fishing shirt that's like either long sleeve or 3/4 sleeve, loafers. It's kind of an aqua color or whatever.
I've seen this man before, yes.
Exactly. When he came home from work, apparently he was wearing like a collared Vinnie Vines shirt is what he called it. I guess he means vineyard vines.
Yeah.
And she said that she remembered that specifically because when he was getting ready to walk out, he had put his jacket on and the collar was sticking up out of it, and she fixed it for him. And it was like the seafoam green thing or whatever. Well, he never told the police that he changed any of his outfits or whatever. So she looks at the video and they say, do you recognize this Columbia shirt or whatever? She's like, yeah, he had a few colors of them in his closet. They were always in his closet. Have you ever seen this shirt again? No, not after June 7th, 2021. Has she ever washed that again? Has she ever folded it again? Has she ever hung it up again? His loafers / house shoes that he wore all the time, he's wearing in this video. She never saw those again. They always stayed by the door because he'd slip them on and off when he was in the house. But he came to her later and said, Blanca, I need you to sit down. We've got to talk. And she's like, what's going on? And he's like, I got a bad feeling something's not right. And he said, you remember what I was wearing that night. You remember that when I left, that I was wearing my Vinnie Vine shirt. You remember that. You remember that that's what I was wearing. And she said she didn't tell him that she remembered it, but she knew that he was trying to get her to lie about what he was wearing because she knew he wasn't wearing that because he'd worn it earlier in the day, but she knew that he had changed again. So he tried to get her to fudge it a little bit.
Oh, this is a crazy trial.
Yeah.
And we're only, I mean, I don't know how much more there is.
Yeah. We have the
We're
defense.
an hour.
Yeah, we're an hour in. We have the defense to go through, which is really the only thing I want to talk about in the defense is Alex's testimony himself because he took the stand. Mainly, but we do still have that. So maybe we should wrap it at the prosecution's case and pick back up at the defense.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we shall do that then.
Just so it's a little bit more palatable for everyone. And I think that's a good place to kind of as well.
Yeah. Sounds good. All right.
Woo! This is a roller coaster.
It really is. And watching it was just riveting for me.
I gotta tell you, and you better relish this moment, you are damn good at explaining this. I can feel the passion. I feel like I'm there. I prefer this more because I've tried to watch trials in the past, like active, like in real time live trials. It's not my I see the appeal. It's not my jam. I get very
it's a lot of stopping and starting.
Minutia and
yeah.
So this format works for me, but you done great, kid.
Well, thanks, girl.
You're welcome,
all right,
girl.
Well, we'll see you for part 2 next time.
Yes, we love you.
Bye.